All right, here we are looking at bringing all of our trigonometry skills together. This lesson is suitable for a 3C or a 2D class after you have learned all of these prerequisite skills that we're looking at right here. The prerequisite skills we're relying on. You will need to, if you're following through here, you'll need to make sure you are comfortable with your primary trig ratios. That's your SOHCAHTOA, your sine, cosine, and tangent ratios, working with a right triangle. You'll need to make sure you're comfortable with your sine law. That is labeling your triangle, ABC, labeling your angles, ABC, and working from there. You'll have to make sure you're comfortable working with your cosine law and that the sum of interior angles for a triangle is 180 degrees. If I was going to be a little bit more thorough, we would also be relying on your ability to handle the Pythagorean theorem or sum of squares. We're not going to rely on that here because those are not part of this course. We're just assuming that you have those skills when you're working through here. I want you to take a moment with your SOHCAHTOA, your sine law, and your cosine law. And I would just want you to consider which of those you're most comfortable with, which of those have the most opportunities for making mistakes when you're working through your calculations. Pause the video here and consider what you're working with. So we'll be working here with this flowchart, and we're trying to piece it all together, trying to come up with a plan for how we're going to use our skills. Now, first of all, if it's a right triangle, then it is altogether a simpler triangle to work with. If it's a right triangle, you can always rely on your SOHCAHTOA, your sine, your cosine, and your tangent ratios. Those only work with right triangles, so if it's not a right triangle, you are forced to move forward. You're forced to look and say, okay, does this have two opposite pairs? An opposite pair obviously comes from an angle and a side length that are opposite that you're working with, and then maybe another angle and a side length that are opposite that you're working with. If you have two opposite pairs, then you are eligible to work with your sine law. And let's keep right on going. If it does not have a right angle, if it does not have two opposite pairs, then we're working forward and we're saying, okay, does it have the minimum requirements needed to work with cosine law? Now, cosine law will be our least preferred option because cosine law has the most algebraic steps when you're working forward, and because of that, the most opportunities for mistakes. The requirements for cosine law, you need to make sure you have three sides and one angle, and your unknown has to be part of the opposite pair, which is whichever side is opposite to this angle or the angle itself. That'll have to be your unknown, and if that's the case, like I said, cosine law will be an appropriate strategy. If not, if you have, say, three sides and one angle and you're not working with the unknown part of the opposite side, you'll actually have a two-step problem where you'll work with your sine law twice to work forward and find your unknown. Alternatively, if you don't have three sides and one angle, if you don't have two opposite pairs, if you don't have a right triangle, you don't have enough information to solve your triangle, you're going to need to try and find some more measurements before you work forward. Now let's take a look at these four triangles. I encourage you, pause the video here, use the flowchart, try and figure out a suitable strategy for these. We're not going to use the strategies ourselves here. We're just going to determine the appropriate strategy to solve for the unknowns. And here we go. Right away, we're working with a right triangle. You can tell from this symbol on the side, because we're working with a right triangle, we know we're going to be able to use our SOHCAHTOA here. In this particular case, we would be working with a hypotenuse, we'd be working with an opposite side, so we know that we would be working with our sine ratio there. Now our next triangle, it is not a right triangle, there's no symbol in the corner right here, so we know SOHCAHTOA is not an appropriate strategy. Does it have two opposite pairs? Absolutely. I see an angle and a side, an angle and a side, they are opposite to one another. That tells us we're lucky, we can work with our sine law. We are not stuck relying on our cosine law here, which, as we said, is the least convenient strategy to work with. Next, I have an unknown side length, which is opposite to my angle, and I have three angles themselves. That tells me that I can work with my cosine law, which at the very least, I have the skills, I can jump right in. And lastly, I'm working right here. Again, I see myself a right angle down in here because I'm working with a right angle. I know I can work with our SOHCAHTOA. It's that easy. I'm hoping at this point you are comfortable determining an appropriate strategy when you're working to solve a triangle. Nice and quick one today.